Hi.
Oh, we're here. Oh my gosh. Okay. So first off, I want to say thank you to everybody who is here, in spite of the fact that this is a weird time for us, since usually we do it late at night and drink a lot, and now it's in the afternoon, and some of us are sober. Zeyn, who I'm so happy to be talking to, Zeyn Joukahadar, who wrote The 30 Names of Night, is here with us, and he's actually in Italy. So he can drink as much as he wants right now, because first of all, it's Italy, and secondly, it's like pretty late, right?
Yeah, it's like 8 p.m. here, but I'm so psyched that we could do this. And yeah, it's awesome to actually like virtually meet you, you know.
It's so nice. It's so nice. And I was afraid we weren't going to be able to do it, because I know that there's like a million things going on. And so thank you so much for making some time to come and talk to us, because this book, first of all, this book is amazing and wonderful. And I had so many things I wanted to talk to you about you. And then I also know that there are a lot of people who also had a lot of questions. So as usual, you guys, just in case you're new to the Fantastic Strangelings, if you have questions, you can just put them in the chat on the side, and Elizabeth's going to go through, and then we'll probably talk for about 20, 30 minutes. And then after that, Elizabeth will email me some of the questions so that Zeyn can ask them. And yeah, so that's kind of how this goes. So I wanted to start, first of all, before we start talking about the book and writing, we do this thing called the 5 weird questions, which are the 5 weird questions that we ask everyone. And so let's see, the first question is, it's 2 weeks into the zombie apocalypse, where would you be?
Oh gosh. Well, 2 weeks. I mean, I guess I would have had time to, make some kind of a like a raid on the supermarket or something and get food. So I guess that would be taken care of. I don't know. I'd probably be in some kind of, I don't know, basement, someplace without windows that I could defend and put all of my books and hang out and read. I don't know, probably.
I love it. I love it. Most people are like, I would be dead. So I love that you have a plan. Good job. Let's see, what is an underrated or underappreciated book that you think everyone should read?
Oh gosh. Well, I really, really loved, I read this last year and I'm still like telling people about it. I loved Small Beauty. It's a novel by Gia Wilson Yang. And it's basically about, now this is all from my memory and off the top of my head, but basically it's about an Asian Canadian trans woman who is she goes, I believe the story is that she goes to the cabin of a loved one who has recently died and is basically going through his things. And it's her like interacting with this rural community and learning about the history of her own family and of that place. And it's really hard to describe, but there's like some sort of fabulism, magical realism at play there too. And it's just like this really hard to describe, but intensely beautiful book that I really love.
That sounds fantastic and awesome. And I am writing it down right now. What is your favorite word?
Oh, interesting. I feel like that should be easy, but it's not at all. Gosh. I don't know. I've always really liked, this is not an English word, but I've always really thought the word pamplemousse was funny. I think isn't that like grapefruit in French?
Yes. Oui, c'est vrai.
Which I do not speak well, so.
It's such a good word though.
Right.
How do you like your eggs?
These are such random questions. I love it. Usually I don't know what the word for this is, where I guess is it over easy, where you like you put it in the pan and you flip it once and it's still kind of soft on the inside. That's how I usually make them.
I think that's over easy. Or is that over medium? No, that is over easy.
I have no
Yeah.
idea. I don't know, but I like them. So
That's awesome. And this one, actually, this is our added one. Samantha Irby came up with this one, and I liked it so much. I was like, we have to ask this all the time, which is, what could the devil bring you?
I'm like not even sure how to interpret that.
If I was like, hey, I'm going to run out and get something from the devil, what do you need me to bring back? What would be something that you would be like, oh, I would take that from the devil?
I feel like all I get is trouble anyway. So it's like I'm getting that on a daily basis, especially this year. So that's what's being brought to me. So I feel like that's the answer we have already, right?
Yeah. And we all have plenty of trouble at the moment. So yes, total agreement. Awesome, perfect. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the 30 Names of Night. Beautiful, which I want to say I continually call the 30 Days of Night because I've watched too many zombie movies. And then I always have to like remind myself that's not the name. So I absolutely loved this book for a number of different reasons. The lyrical prose was phenomenal. Anytime I started to get a little confused about like, there's so many people and we're going back and forth between time periods, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to read this for the prose. And like a page later, I would know where I was again. And I would have some like great, beautiful thing, like on almost every page. And I'm a terrible book owner because I do this thing where like, if I see things that I like, I dog ear the bottom of it. And as you can tell, your book is dog eared all over the place.
I do that too. I know it's terrible, but I can't help myself.
I'm the worst. Elizabeth always says, you know, if you want to, you could just borrow a book from the bookstore. You don't have to buy them every time. And I'm like, oh no, the way I read them, I have to buy them for myself. But like one of my favorite ones was no boy has ever moved me the way you did that afternoon. This is not how I was supposed to feel. The lack of you hurts. You are the knife with which I cut myself. I was like, I had to put it down. I was like, okay, well, I will never write anything that beautiful. So excellent. Good job.
Thank you.
So what was your original inspiration for this book?
Well, I think the thing that made it really difficult to write was that the original inspiration was more of an idea or like a theme. And I feel like I kind of like, I'm always angry at myself because I frequently have book ideas that start like this, where I'm sort of like, I want to talk about this, you know, this giant cloud of things. And that's not really good for like forming plot or anything like that. But I basically had this sense that I wanted to talk about being a trans person of color and trying to find some connection to one's history, but not just in the sense of like knowing one's history, but understanding in this sort of deep self-knowledge way that there were people that came before you in that community, that there were other, in this case, that there were other Arab Americans who were queer, who were trans. And that could be in terms of like, you know, elders, or just historical, not just necessarily historical figures, but like people that had just sort of had these regular everyday lives and lived them. Or it could be ancestors, like directly in one's own family, just because we know that these people were there and we know that they lived and had full lives, even if that history may either have been not written down or may have been erased, or may have been, you know, even people themselves may have sort of tried to purge certain things from diaries, from records. I mean, that's part of, you know, in the erasures in the book itself, in Layla's diary, there's those erasures to sort of talk about that. But the thing that kind of made it like a concrete idea was when I I was actually in New York City, and there was an exhibition about Little Syria, and I remember seeing, like, as I was going through and I was looking at the photographs and I was listening to, there were like, you know, records, recordings and things like this, songs, and I was like, I'm from New York City, like I'm from Yorkville, like I grew up, I mean, and I grew up like not very far away from where Little Syria used to be in Lower Manhattan. And I grew up, obviously, like I'm Arab American, and I, you know, was the way I grew up, we were in a studio apartment with 4 people, and like in a community that where in my sort of little world, there were lots of immigrants and there were lots of people of color. It would have been so nice to know that like there was this whole history that went way, way back before me. And I didn't grow up learning about that. I mean, I don't think that it's something that a lot of people know about. So when I realized that there had been this whole neighborhood, I was like, this is really, I mean, I feel like it's important for me to know more about this. And of course, then I started digging into the archives of the Arab American National Museum when I was there as an artist in residence. And I think that like it was more of a long like taking form as opposed to like a single sort of kernel, but it was maybe the idea just that people like had these amazing lives that I never knew about, you know?
Yeah. Does Little Syria, does it exist at all anymore now, or?
It does. I guess you could say that it does. I mean, there is, so like the Washington Street Historical Society is doing a really, has for a long time been making efforts to have, you know, preserve these buildings and have them designated as landmarks. Because there are 3 buildings left. So it's not much, but there are these 3 buildings basically all in a row on one block of Washington Street. And one of them is a church. I mean, they're in the book, you know, but it's true, right? Like the church that's on that street is now a pub. That part is true. There is this community house. There is a tenement building. The tenement building, I think, is actually still inhabited. But you walk by and, you know, I think that the Historical Society has also been pushing for like some sort of acknowledgement, like either a plaque or like some sort of something to acknowledge that like this is a historical neighborhood. But yeah, it's almost entirely gone, which is really sad.
Wow. Wow. So one of the things that I really loved about this book was this like overlay of themes where there were so many themes that at a certain point I was like, can't keep up. There's but like in a good way. But you know, everything from, you know, grief and immigration and community and the constraints that we put on ourselves and on others, and race and religion and sexuality and acceptance. And there were so many amazing uh, analogies and stories that the first time I read it, I read it and I loved it. The second time I read it, I saw all of these little connections, and I was like, okay, don't know if this is because I'm reading it drunk the second time, or or if it's accurate. So I was like, since I have you here, maybe I can like throw these out and you can be like, wow, you're really reaching. Or you could be like, yeah, that's totally, I'm so glad you picked that up.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right. So here were like the little things that I got the second time around. So like Sammy and his silk knots making the invisible bonds visible, I thought was an interesting callback to Layla when she was using knots in her lace making to make the birds. And I loved those, the making the invisible visible, the migration of birds, and also the struggle of the immigration of people, the sanctuary of birds, and then also the sanctuary of that comes from like finding your community where you can become yourself and you can feel protected to grow in the way that you need to grow. Let's see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so all right, so far, okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. So the main character, so when he called himself the fox-headed boy when he shaved off his hair, and then comparing that to, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, Kaltotala, is that how you pronounce it?
Khalto. Yeah, Khalto Tala.
Kaltotala. Okay. Um, how she said that the fox was waiting for her and the birds were calling for her, but then she turned away from the wilderness, from the safety of the town. And for me, that was like her turning away from who she really truly could be to like the safety of sort of maybe hiding yourself back at that time.
Do you want me to talk about that a little bit? I can talk
Yes,
about
I
that
would
one.
love to. Yes.
I mean, because it's one of my, I mean, I really love that moment when Khaltotala is recounting this story. And I mean, for sure there is a connection, like a loose one between Nadar. So Nadar at the beginning does make this sort of wish about wanting to not have a body. And I mean, that I know for me, and I think a lot of other, not every trans person, but a lot of trans people, especially a lot of non-binary people, where we don't necessarily have a clear idea of like, oh, I really I want to, I want to look like a, cis binary woman or a cis binary man. I know exactly what I want to look like. And not every trans person has that experience. And I think especially for non-binary people, it can be really hard because you don't necessarily have a lot of models for what will make you feel most embodied, or how you want to present yourself in the world. And so he makes this sort of wish about being something else, the heart of a fox, the sap in a maple. And then later on in the story, when Khaltotala has that moment where she turns back, the way that I was trying to talk about it was, or think about it, was that she makes this really complicated decision to, yes, in a way, to make the safe decision and to go back to this life that was expected of her. But it's not quite that simple, is it? Because she doesn't get married. She does have a relationship with another woman. And then also, she talks specifically about how there are other people that are counting on her, where she has this understanding that like her life isn't entirely her own. And I mean, I think this kind of like collective thinking or collective culture is one of the things that, at least for me growing up in an Arab family, understanding Arab culture, that can be one of sort of the facets of Arab culture, is this sense that like you do sort of have a responsibility to the people around you, and that when you do certain things, make certain choices, you may not just disrupt your own life, but you may disrupt other people's lives as well. And so, there's a way in which like this sort of traditional coming out narrative of, you have to come out publicly and to everyone all the time, or else you're not sort of valid or real. I mean, that's not something that applies to every community or every culture. And I think especially it's really complicated for people of color in general. And for immigrants and for anybody who's oppressed, because it sort of draws more problems to you, potentially to your family, to everyone. And so like when people of color, and oppressed people in general, and et cetera, like make the choice to come out, and who we decide to come out to, whether we do that publicly or not, how we present ourselves, it's often a really complicated choice. So I think for Khaltotala, she makes this really complicated choice for which we can't judge her, right? It's not as simple necessarily as it being like the safe choice, but Nadar ultimately makes a different one. And so so do the other characters, Layla and Ilyas. So I, on the one hand, like really hurt for her in that moment. And on the other hand, like I can really understand it,
Yes, absolutely. I loved that there were so many characters and every single one had such a specific sort of combination that I could see myself in every single one of them, both the good and the bad. There was just the way that they were written was so whole, I think, and empathetic, and yeah, which is why it was one of those books when it like, okay, I miss these people. I want these people to come back. I need them all.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, me too. It hurts to finish writing a book too. You're like, no, really? Do we have to be done now?
Right. Do you get that whenever I'm done with a book, I always get this specific type of depression after it's turned into the final edits of like, oh, I don't get to live in that world anymore.
I absolutely, yeah. I mean, I feel like that's inevitable, and so I dread it every time. But yeah,
I always feel like a hypocrite too, because I'm one of those people that like I don't love to write. Like I have to write. I feel like I have to, but I'm not like, yay, writing. I can't wait to sit down. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to bleed all over the page. And after I'm done, I'm like, oh, this is great. I love this. This is what I need. But always hard at the time.
Yeah, it's like an occupational hazard, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. I wanted to talk a little bit about I loved the idea of the forgotten or, sort of invisible trans and queer people from past generations. Simply because not that long ago, a few years ago, I was listening to it was like one of those BBC documentaries, and this older woman had said something like, well, I'm very glad for that gay people can be gay now, but they didn't exist when I was young. And she absolutely believed it, that it just was not really a thing. And it's so interesting looking back. I think each of us in our past generations, and thinking, um, what sort of lives were maybe loved, and the beauty of them, and or also hidden away. And I mean, how lucky in many ways, that we are where we are, but at the same time, how far we still have to go. Um, but I loved how you talked about the past generations. Have you found anything in your like family history that made you go, oh, okay, I think I maybe could see some of that?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think that like I wasn't really thinking about my own family necessarily when I was writing this book, because I was really immersed in this very sort of world that I had to build in this very specific way for this narrative. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I do have queer people in my sort of extended family and even elders. But I think that like probably most families do. I mean, and one of those things too that people say the same thing that you mentioned before about trans people a lot. Like I've had a lot of people be like, well, but trans people didn't exist when I was a kid, or things like this, or I don't know any trans people. And the funny thing about it is that like what I either say if I can or want to say to that is always the same. And it is, you absolutely do know trans people. You just don't realize that you know them. And probably most people also know trans elders. They just don't realize that they know trans elders. So I just think that, yeah, I don't know. I like that, like, any opportunity to have those kinds of conversations where people can maybe question those impulses to be like, well, no, this is sort of like the world exists on this plane and nothing else can exist. The world is a lot more complex and people are a lot more complex than, I mean, I was going to say than we think, but I mean, I'm not sure that's true. I mean, like, I think that if you just barely go looking for it, it becomes quickly obvious. I think sometimes people also may not be comfortable with seeing people that are right in front of their faces. So, or that those people might not feel safe, but regardless, like, do we necessarily have to see everything either about everybody that we know? Like, I think there's also that sort of public-private information divide that that is also really complicated. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's complicated. I think that it's important to me that we talk about the fact that like people are all over the place and have always been all over the place. And also that like, we don't like, do we have to know each individual person that we cross paths with, what their exact story is, to respect people in general, or to like fight for each other's rights? I don't think we necessarily do. I think we can just do that,
Right.
But now I'm rambling, so stop me.
It's good for him. It's interesting. As I while I was reading this, I do a lot of what is it called, like ancestry stuff. And I always find I have all of these ancestors who like just literally disappeared, and sometimes I'll find them and I'm like, oh, they went to jail, which was not an uncommon thing for my family. But a lot of them just disappeared altogether. And it was interesting how I was then able to go like, oh, everybody has a story. Everybody has, and reading this, like every single time that you start to think, oh, I understand, this person's background and this person's story, and then you realize you don't. Like even if you think you know everything about them, you still don't. And my my dad's side of the family, they're Czech, and so I came out as bi and my daughter came out as lesbian. And I think my dad was just kind of like, what? Because literally nobody on that side has ever, um, outspokenly, and so I think he was just kind of like, what happened to this family? Like all of them. And so it was interesting for me to go back and be like, just because we may be the first family that's able to be open doesn't mean that we're anywhere near the first family. So I thought that was an interesting thing to keep coming back to, and to keep in mind just all of these stories that we don't know about each other. Like even when we share our deepest stuff, there's still so much more in each of
Yeah,
us.
absolutely.
Let's see. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, let's see if I have time. I do. I have a couple more minutes before we go to the other questions. So the main character, he's exploring, being an artist and coming of age as an artist. And the idea that being a muralist or a graffiti artist, he just didn't sort of accept right from the top that sort of was an art. And I loved that full sort of character arc. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, partially when I was thinking about that, so first of all, so my father was a visual artist. He was a painter, and my partner is also a visual artist and was trained in painting and now does other things. But one thing that I've learned about the art world in general is how, just like many other fields, there are problems all over the place, not just in the US, but elsewhere too, with racism, with sexism, with misogyny, with, homophobia and all kinds of things. And so like who is sort of able to move in the art world in certain ways, whose work gets more recognition. I mean, that's something that has been painful to learn about too. And for this character is especially painful, knowing that he's sort of like, I know that my work and the work of the people that I love and respect isn't necessarily welcome and celebrated in the way that it should be. But he also has a lot of sort of internalized like elitism, among other things, about like what is real art. And so like part of his journey in the book is coming to terms with the fact that the art that he's making is real art and like is worthwhile, but also in the same sense that he himself is valid and worthwhile, and that he is also searching for the sacred through his work, and also just through in his own life, in the context of his own life. And I think that's what ties all of those disparate themes that you were mentioning earlier. What ties them all together is that all the characters in some way are searching for the sacred in, and trying to experience some part of the sacred in themselves, like in their own sort of everyday bodily sensory lives. And they all do it differently. And the way that Nether does it is to a great degree through his art, because it allows him to transcend the body for which he is so often sort of either judged or sort of given a certain story to follow that he just can't.
Yes, I love that the term, the the finding the sacred in everything and searching for the sacred. And I loved the idea that you can't see magic unless you're looking for it, which was something that I think sort of came up again and again. To me, in some ways, I felt like this was almost like a fairy tale because of just the way that it was written, and there were so many things that felt just really magical to me. and so like for me, I would almost put this in a fairy tale sort of genre because it is, I don't know, it just felt like magic when I was reading it. I felt like I was transported to another place where everything was, oh, so good.
Thank you.
Um, let's see. So what's next for you? What are you working on next?
Too many
And
things.
now.
Yeah, I'm working on a couple of different novel projects that are still like too early to talk about in any great detail, but I'm working on those, and I'm also working on this ongoing project that my partner are doing, where we are researching like the history of constellations and sky traditions around in the cultures around the Mediterranean. So like Southern Europe, that's sort of more like a lot of the Ptolemaic traditions are things that are sort of taught to a great degree in general, but there's also a lot of other traditions in the Levant and in North Africa, ancient Mesopotamian traditions and ancient Egyptian traditions that like are a lot of the roots of the constellations that we know about, but we don't necessarily know where they come from. So we're working on this sort of like hybrid artistic text project, and yeah, we'll see where that goes. We're calling it the Atlas of Marvels, but yeah, so we're working on that, and that's, I'm telling you this because my mouth is like taped shut about the other two novels, but they're also in the works. So
I love it. I love it. The Atlas of Mars. Okay, well, I
oh,
totally
and
want.
I should say actually that I'm like forgetting the obvious thing, which is that on Monday, February 9th, the anthology Kink is coming out, where I have a brand new short story. So that's coming out from Simon and Schuster with the editors are Reese Kwan and Garth Greenwell, and it's really good. So I'm super psyched about it.
Pink. Okay, putting that on my list. Elizabeth, if you're listening, can you put that to the side because I will pick that up tomorrow when the bookstore is closed. I can only go when the bookstore is closed because I can't be around people. But so Sunday is my day that I get to come into the to my empty bookstore and walk around and go books. Awesome.
Nice.
Oh, it's so good. It is the only thing keeping me sane. Let's see. So I've got some questions that have come from our lovely members. Let's see. Did you know much about birds prior to writing and researching this book?
I did most of the research just for this project. I mean, I did know a little bit, but not in any kind of formal way. I think it was more just like, I did live, well, actually, so I did live in rural Pennsylvania for a couple of years for a job before I started writing this book. And one of the things that I liked to do when I lived there was a bird sanctuary nearby that had like an art center. It was like partly like this art center that was dedicated to this bird artist who was from the area, I guess. And then there was like a bird sanctuary and like hiking trails behind it. So I was really lonely, and it was really a rural place, and I was not used to living in that kind of a place. And I would go to this place and just look at this bird art. And so I think in some way, like it did kind of work on my psyche a little bit, but it was, at the time, it was just really like a solace for me. So
Yes. Yeah. Well, I learned a lot about books. I mean, about birds as I was going through your book because I would be like, okay, gotta look up that one. Okay, gotta look up that one. So good job on that. You've made me
I
an
put my
actual.
favorites in there, you know.
I love it. Let's see. Your book seems very well researched. What portions of the book required the most research for you?
Well, I mean, yeah. Well, it covers a lot of ground. So like because we're starting in the 1920s, 1930s, um, I mean, I had done research in the things take place during these periods where there's like a conflict going on sort of in the background. It's always really interesting to me to see what people are, just how they're living their everyday lives in the meantime. So while it was really fun to write, to think about like, wow, they had like their lives were going on with this in the background. I wonder what that must have been like. It was a little bit tricky. It took me a long time to get those scenes right.
Well, you did very well, because I'm embarrassed to say I had to look up a lot as I was going through about, not just about Syria, but about America during the older times. And there was so much that I was like, oh, I'm an idiot. I didn't know anything about that. How did I not know? Just some like really basic stuff. So good job. You're educating.
Thanks.
Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. What authors have inspired you personally?
Well, I've been really inspired by the work of a lot of Arab American writers. Way too many for me to like mention here. Some of them are Rabia Al-Amadin, who wrote the Hakawati. Randa Jarrar, who's actually a friend of mine as well, but is like an utterly brilliant writer. Her memoir just came out like 3 days ago. Love is the Next Country, and it's really good.
Oh, I read that. That's so
You
good.
did?
It's
It's
so
so
good.
good.
Oh my God, so good.
It's amazing. And some of my other influences that I've sort of like, I mean, those are folks I've been reading for a really long time. Some authors, well, also I've been reading, I mean, Toni Morrison, I've been reading like forever. But like, and I know that everybody's always like, oh, everyone says Toni Morrison because she's amazing and like one of the greats, but also like a lot of Afrofuturist writing, especially lately as I'm working on some new projects, like a lot of Octavia Butler. I've been reading more and more Nnedi Okorafor also. Anyway, a lot of like the sort of Latinx magical realist writers, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Borges, but a lot of folks. I think like that all sort of those like that group of like authors and traditions has been like big influence on me. Also in terms of like Arab oral storytelling techniques in general, and like Arabic language literature, which I sadly have to read in translation because I'm not good enough at reading Arabic to read in the original. But I think that my work is like definitely in conversation with, or try to make my work in conversation with work that's also being produced outside of the US, not just what's being produced in the US, as much as I can.
Yes. Okay, somebody just asked, can you say the name of the memoir again? It's Love is an Ex-Country. And
Yeah,
so good. As a matter of fact,
it's
I
so good.
found it somewhere. It's literally, I would be embarrassed to show you the pile, but it's in this pile of books that I've just read in the last week. It's very, very good. You should definitely read it. Is another, because I noticed as you were going through, I was like, okay, well, we have the same taste in reading. A book that you need to read. I don't think it's come out yet. I think it comes out next month. Wait, it's on my bookshelf. Hang on.
We get to
Sorry.
see the rainbow bookshelf behind you.
I'm the worst. Like, as soon as people start talking about books, I'm like, have you read this? Have you read this? Okay, so I just read this one, which is Red Island House.
Ooh.
Oh, it's so good. Andrea Lee wrote it. It's gonna be a paperback. This is the ARC. I think it comes out, when does it come out? March 23rd. It is about an African-American woman who marries an Italian and goes to live in Italy, and then they go to Madagascar and live in this giant house, and she becomes like the lady of the house. And it's so very, very similar in that it has a million themes of loss and grief and colonialism and patriarchy and race and gender, and oh my gosh, and it's
Oh, wow.
so good. It's so good. So anyway, you should totally read it, because
Red Island House. Okay, I'm definitely gonna go read it.
it's so good. And you know what was really funny is when you were just talking different constellations, there's a part in here where she's out in front of her house, and she almost feels like just that she feels so other, because she doesn't really feel like she fits anywhere, because she's lived sort of everywhere. And she looks up and she's looking at the constellations, and the people she's with are looking at them, and they're talking about like, oh, this is this constellation, which was not, of course, the same constellation in America as they are using in Madagascar. And they start talking about like what that constellation means and how it would, in some ways represent her. And I loved it. Anyway, you're gonna
Oh,
like it.
that's really cool. Thank you.
Yes. Let's see. Okay, sorry. I lost my okay. I lost my question. Let's see. What are your favorite ways to maintain physical and mental health? It's a good question right
Hmm.
now.
Yeah, it is. I journal every day, and that's been something that I started doing like maybe 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago, and I just have kept it up ever since because now I'm like addicted to it. I feel like I need to, if I don't like sort of empty my brain of thoughts in the morning, I can't focus on anything else. So that's one. Um, Exercise, which is really hard right now. But even if it's just like something that I'm doing in the house, I feel like with writers, it's really easy to just like not move around at all. Like you sort of sit in front of your computer and I find that for me, it's just not good for my mental state. Um, and in general, I try to like, I've been doing this new thing is in terms of like since the start of the pandemic, which has been to try to get in touch with at least one close friend every day. I just feel like it's been so easy to get isolated. I mean, and it's isolating anyway, but it's also easy to just like, well, I'm not in sort of a good place mentally, emotionally today, so I just won't reach out. But then it just sort of spirals. So for me, that's been a big one, having people like being connected to people as much as possible.
Yes. My one of my friends, I only have maybe three friends who I text with, and I'm very much an introvert, so I don't hear from very many people. But my one friend that I have that lives in this town, she texted me. We haven't seen each other in almost a year now, and she said this morning, I kind of feel like when all of this is over, I'm not going to know how to have conversations. And I responded, popsicle baby foot. Um, and she totally got it. She was like, oh yeah, you don't know how to have conversations right now. And I was like, thank God I still have someone in my life who understands my weird sense of humor. Um, but I was just like, here's the thing is, we'll just get used to it slowly. When we start talking again in real life, and we will just give ourselves permission to have lots of awkward silences and, just constantly misunderstand each other.
Yeah. It's really a thing though. It's hard. Even doing like virtual events, I'm like, have I forgotten how to speak? Like what is happening? So I
Yes.
don't know. I guess
It's
it's normal
hard.
now.
It's hard, and it's both wonderful and exhausting. I told so my daughter and my husband, I was like, after we're done, we're gonna play a game. And I said, but I need an hour to like decompress from this because I'm gonna be partly like up because this is the most I've talked to someone like in real life in literally 2 months.
I
But
feel you.
also,
I really
right?
do.
But also it's gonna be, I'm gonna have this like exhaustion of like, what did I say wrong? I don't know. Did my hair fall off? I don't know. Maybe it did. Look, and I just want to say, I still have my hair on. I'm gonna take it off because it's getting hot.
We should just make an agreement right now that it's fine. And we're not going to think
Right?
about this afterward as like, oh my God, was I weird? I was too vulnerable,
I
because
love
I'll
it.
be doing the same thing.
Okay, good, good. And you'll be like, that bitch pulled her hair off halfway through the interview. I'm not gonna judge myself, so it's fine.
That was an inspiration. That was goals.
It is like it's the best thing. You find them on the internet. They're like $10. They're just these little wires, and you just put it in, and then it's fantastic. They're just these little fake, and then I can pretend I have hair, and then I watched it, and I didn't. But just pretend I did. Uh, let's see. So much of the bird imagery in your book had a feeling of magical realism, but I'm not sure that I would categorize this book as a whole as magical realism. Did you intentionally write those components differently? And if so, how did you make that choice?
Yeah, so I did do that intentionally. I mean, I usually describe my work as having fabulous elements, because it's not usually the whole thing that works on that level. But I intentionally put things. I mean, for one thing, I think that I like how it destabilizes the narrative. I like how it destabilizes the characters, but also how it makes you how I can potentially access truths on a symbolic level that I can't otherwise. So like, for example, that there is this, well, so everyone's read this, so spoilers are okay, right?
Oh yeah.
So there's that scene where a woman dies in childbirth, and there's two beings that are born, and one is a bird and one is a human, and the bird sort of escapes. And I mean, and like, in order to get at a certain kind of truth, I used the bird, right? Like the bird, the fabulous element of the bird being born and escaping was, I mean, I think it works on a number of levels. One of them being like possibilities that both exist and no longer exist, or of just this, a way to indicate that this is a somehow very important birth, or that like this person's life has been touched by something that is unseen, or even if it's seen, it's something that there's no language for, it can't be acknowledged somehow because it's not considered real. And I mean, that as a theme is like a big deal in the book, where there are these things that are real but go unacknowledged because we don't have the words for them. And I think the birds fall into that category. So like that is, it provides sort of a tonal backdrop for the characters and for, you know, me as the writer to talk about how there is this like existence of, I mean, even just the existence of queer and trans people throughout history that is like a real thing that is going unacknowledged, or like so many of Nether's experiences that are real but go unacknowledged, or go sort of mislabeled or brushed under the rug, or that there's just no justice for certain things that have happened to him. Just like with the bird itself, that's like, people say, no, it never existed, it's not real, we're not going to believe anyone who says that they saw it. You could say the same thing about that Nether feels the same way, right? That he's the rare bird that he's been looking for, that he wants acknowledgement of his own existence, where the world looks at him and tells him all the time that he doesn't exist. So I think like in that way, using those fabulous elements lets me say that without just sort of telling it to the reader, you know?
Right, right. Okay, so this is a longer question, but it's a very good one. This may sound incredibly naive, so apologies in advance. But I was taken aback when I saw, I don't know, I'm going to pronounce this right, bulbul, which is the Hindi word for nightingale. I went down a rabbit hole of similarities between the languages, and my non-question is there an intentional subliminal trope about the interconnectedness of us all as illustrated by these languages?
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, I don't know if I can say that I like intentionally, that I like really thought about that. But I love that. I mean, like, you know, once a book is out in the world, it's like, I don't own it anymore. So whatever people find in it, like, how can I say that that's not true if you see it, right? But I think it's cool. And bulbul, yeah, is also in Arabic as well, it has the same meaning. So I think that's really wild. I love that, actually. So.
That is awesome. Let's see. And how did you come from your more scientific background to becoming an author?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's a question I get a lot, and I always laugh. I don't know why I laugh. I guess just because my life is absurd. I think it's absurd. So, I mean, I had been writing, like, I've been trying to write long form fiction since I was like 9 years old, where I mean, reading was one of the things that like allowed me to survive childhood. And I had been writing, you know, all through grade school, middle school, high school, college, even into grad school. And so I went to grad school for epigenetics. I have a PhD in epigenetics, and I did a couple of postdoctoral fellowships after that. And I just reached a point in my career where I had left a really, really bad position that was just like, it was a really ugly situation. That was, people were not treated well, and including me. And so I had like left, and I was between jobs, and I was trying to figure out like whether I was going to be able to find something without moving across the country. There were not a lot of jobs in science at that point. And I ended up, while I was sort of trying to figure my life out, being like, wow, what am I going to do next? This could be bad. I just was writing because that was the thing that had like kept me going. And so I ended up writing the first draft of the book that became The Map of Salt and Stars. And then when I was still jobless, you know, like 9 months later, I ended up submitting, well, not submitting, how do you say, like pitching in this Twitter pitch contest called DV Pit, for diverse pitch for marginalized creators. And it was like the first iteration of it ever. And I ended up getting like so many requests, and I had not expected that at all. And a bunch of offers. And I really feel like amazingly lucky and privileged that I was able to connect with my now agent and signed with her as a result of that pitch contest. And yeah, and we're still, we still work together. Like I'm still her client. So I don't like, it's not a story that I can tell and be like, I understand, I have like lessons to give from any of this. It was just like a really weird series of events that sort of happened by accident. And I feel lucky that I can keep doing this, and I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can. I don't know that I'll ever go back into science. I think I'm kind of like, that ship has sailed, but writing about science, yes, maybe, but.
Love it. Well, it's an organically weird way to find your path in the world, and I'm very glad that it worked.
Thanks.
So this one's more of a comment than a question. That's a good one. I hope I can say this without sounding like an idiot. I've always been aggressively pro-trans rights, but this book let me really get an idea of what it's like to be trans and how it feels to experience that. And I just wanted to say thank you for your beautiful and detailed descriptions of those experiences, and for letting me to step into that space more than I ever thought possible.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I hope a lot of people
Let's
have
see.
said that the descriptions of like dysphoria especially are like intense, and things that like maybe are not, we don't get to see a lot of those things that aren't either written by cis people or sort of like aimed at cis people. And I think I'm really glad that I got to write something where I didn't sort of have to or could kind of write without imagining any cis people in the room, because I think that actually gives a much more a much deeper, sort of more authentic imagining of what it can feel like on like a body and an emotional level for folks. And I'm glad if that, if the book is doing some that way also for folks to have more understanding. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful in that way. I personally sent 2 copies to friends of mine whose kids are trying to decide, if they're non-binary or if they're having, some dysphoria problems, and the parents are, trying to be like, I don't know how to help this because I don't really understand. And I, one of the people already has read this book, and they were like, I have such a better understanding now of the uncomfortableness that they're talking about.
Oh, I'm really glad.
So yeah, so thank you for that. Let's see. Another question. Let's see. Did you read The Golem and the Genie? I don't know if I'm saying that, pronouncing that part correctly. Also set in Little Syria. And if so, did you have any thoughts or feelings? It was my personal intro into Little Syria.
I have read that a little while back now. I don't know if I don't know, like off the top of my head, I'm not going to probably come up with anything sort of coherent as far as comments on it, but I have read that. I don't, it's funny because I don't think there's a lot that's been written about Little Syria. So, but maybe, who knows, like maybe there'll be even more in the future. We don't know.
It'll be a revival. Who knows?
Yeah, right.
And what is your favorite bird and why?
Oh, well, I think that the hoopoe is really beautiful. I also just really have a thing for like crows, which sounds, I feel like maybe that's a boring choice, but I feel like they're very intelligent. And one thing that is true and weird about me, I feel like with the weird questions, this is like a weird question that I could have been asked. I have this thing where I've been trying and succeeding in some ways to talk to birds for like a very long time, for like most of my life. And I'm very good at imitating bird sounds. I've like developed this weird, useless skill. And like crows especially have like a bajillion sounds. And if you make the wrong one, like they'll look at you and they'll be like, I see you, human, like you are not fooling me. But they'll also like make friends with you if you give them things. And like, that's not necessarily a good thing. They remember faces, like they're amazing. So I don't know.
They hold grudges.
I think they're very cool. They do hold grudges. That is true. There's studies of this.
Yes. Yeah. For me, same. Crows and ravens are my 2 favorite birds, and I actually had to like go to Europe so that I could see them for the first time, because I couldn't see them around here in Texas, and or crows sometimes, but not ravens. And I I got there and I saw them and I was just like, oh, this is the most amazing thing ever. And then not that long ago, just a few months ago, I was outside and an enormous raven swooped by, and I mean, yelled at me. And it was the most, like, I cried, like literally had tears cut. I would not go back inside. I like had to call my husband. I was like, get out here. There was a raven. And he was like, okay, it's a bird. I'm like, no, it's a sign. Come out. Come. And it never came back. But it was magical. I was like, this is the best thing that's happened to me all year.
You know what I will say is that crows, and I think a lot of peoples around the world have this sense that crows are like harbingers of change or of like the death of one cycle and the beginning of another cycle, because I've heard this in like a lot of different communities. And I have definitely found that like the finding of a raven feather, a crow feather, just like around on my path has definitely coincided with like big things happening in my life. So I feel like they are like magical birds somehow. And maybe all birds are magical, but we have a soft spot for crows.
Exactly. You know, my grandmother always used to say, one of my grandmothers, she always used to say, if you see an owl in the daytime, it means somebody's going to die, so don't look at it. And then my grandmother on the other side was like, that's probably because the owl's going to kill you because you're not supposed to see it in the daytime unless it has rabies because they're only nocturnal. And I was like, I sort of like that it's a little bit of the folklore and a little bit of the science. And I was like, okay, all right. So now every time I have an owl that lives in my backyard, her name is Allie McBeal because she's too thin and I keep trying to feed her more. And so I just, every single time I see her, I'm like, don't have rabies. Don't. And she just looks at me and she's like, whatever, I can be a day owl. I don't have to sleep all night. So.
Oh,
Let's see. I love your necklace. Please tell us about it.
oh, it just says a lot. Yeah, it's from a Muslim like clothing company. I think is it Nominal? I think it's from Nominal. But anyway, yeah, I like it. Thank you.
What conclusion in the book completed the mother spirit arc and stopped her appearing to Nathir?
Oh, so yeah. So basically like the way that I had conceived of it, again, reader interpretation's valid, but I had conceived of it that it's revealed at some point that Nather's mother had figured out that her mother, so Badra, Teta Badra, had this relationship with another woman that she figured out was Layla, because she kept this this keepsake of hers, right, where she had the piece of handkerchief and the locket, I think, and so like the mother, like so Nather's mother had figured this out and had just felt compelled to either to try and reunite them or just to somehow bring closure to her own mother in a way that she didn't get while she was alive. And so like in the end, when Badra and Layla finally actually see each other again, there's this joy that that Badra gets to feel that has been sort of delayed for so many years. And that like, even though Nether's mother has passed on and like is no longer, she can't, like the closure to her own story can never really fully come, although Nether does try his best to bring some closure to it. For her, I guess the way I thought about it was that she sort of feels like both her child and her mother are in a better place than they were when she left. And so she feels she can move on. That was how I thought about it in my own head.
Love it. Love it. That's how I interpreted it as well. But I do love that it's open enough that the first time that I read it and the second time that I read it, and I'm actually reading it for the third time now because I have like a terrible memory. And so I get to reread books over and over because I'm like,
I love that.
Yeah. And so every time I sort of get, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, maybe it's this. Oh, maybe it's that. And I sort of love that it's open enough that I can put myself in and put my own sort of ideas, and it can grow in my own head and in the readers' heads. So we have gone through all the questions and you've answered them, and this has been so much fun, and I loved this.
This was great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, thank you for coming. This was fantastic. Your book was fantastic. I loved everything about this, and I feel like I can say like, oh, I did something social, and oh,
Same.
yay! All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and say hi to Italy for us with a mask, and and thank you to
Will do.
everybody who, yes, who joined us today, because I know it was a weird time, but I sort of loved that it was like in the middle of the day and sober, and yeah, it was kind of fun. It was
Tim, I'll
different.
bring my glass of wine, but
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, and everybody. Next, what's the next book is Swallowed Man, and we're gonna have. I think we are gonna have the author come on. Is he from England? I think he's in Texas now, but I don't even remember. I'm gonna look it up. And I haven't announced the next one. Oh no, I have announced the next one. It's gonna be the Witch's Heart, which is the Norse mythology. Oh, it's really good. And I just figured out March's book, but I'm not going to tell you yet because I have to make sure that we can get enough of them in stock to send them all to you. But oh my gosh. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Oh, so thank you to everybody. Thank you, Zeyn. Thank you, Elizabeth, for putting this together. Thank you guys so much.
thank you so much. Thanks for the reading ideas too.
Sure. Yes.